Call her Rachel. Her father died in February. By April, she'd inherited $280,000. By the following February, she'd put the entire amount in an account her husband couldn't access, and she didn't see it as a betrayal. That's the part people assume first. Secrecy. Distrust. Maybe an exit plan in case the marriage doesn't last. None of that is what was actually going on. What she did see the account as is the part of this story that surprises almost everyone who hears it, and it doesn't come up until later. But once you understand it, you'll understand why so many couples who go through an inheritance end up confused by their own reactions, including the spouse who never expected to feel anything but grateful. This is a composite story built around a pattern some financial therapists describe seeing in their practices. Rachel was 49. Her father had lived alone for the 11 years since her mother passed, in the same house Rachel grew up in outside Sacramento. He died suddenly, a heart attack, no long illness, no time to prepare. The estate was simple: a paid-off house, a modest investment account, some savings. After the house sold and the estate settled, Rachel received a check for $280,000. Her husband, Dale, was supportive the entire way through. He took time off work to help her clean out the house. He sat with her at the funeral home. He never once asked what the inheritance would be or what she planned to do with it. By every visible measure, he handled it exactly right. Here's what nobody warned Rachel about. The money and the grief arrived as the same event, and they never fully separated. Every time she looked at that account balance, she didn't see financial security. She saw her father's handwriting on old documents, her childhood bedroom being packed into boxes, the smell of the house she'd never walk into again. The inheritance wasn't a windfall to her. It was the last physical trace of her parents converted into a number, and the idea of that number simply merging into a joint household account used for a kitchen renovation or a car payment felt less like financial planning and more like erasure. There's a real legal and emotional gap here that almost nobody talks about openly. In most U.S. states, an inheritance received by one spouse is generally treated as that spouse's separate property rather than marital property, unless it's commingled with joint funds or the couple agrees otherwise. Laws vary significantly by state, so anyone navigating this for real should talk to an attorney about their specific situation. But underneath the legal question is an emotional one that matters even more. Marriage runs on an unstated assumption that everything is ours. Most couples never have to define that word precisely because day-to-day income and expenses make the definition obvious. An inheritance breaks that. It arrives addressed to one person, tied to one person's grief, and suddenly the couple has to decide, often without realizing they're deciding, what ours actually means when it isn't automatic anymore. The first real friction showed up small. About 4 months in, Dale mentioned casually that they could finally redo the kitchen they'd been talking about for years. He wasn't trying to claim the money. He was thinking out loud, the way a husband does about a shared household project. But something in Rachel tightened. She heard, "We could redo the kitchen," and what landed was, "Your father's death just became a kitchen renovation." She didn't say that. She said she needed to think about it. Dale, confused but not pushing, dropped it. The conversation didn't happen again for months, but the tension from it didn't go anywhere. This reaction is far more recognizable than Rachel realized at the time. Some financial therapists who work with grieving clients describe a pattern where the receiving spouse experiences a strong, sometimes surprising urge to protect the inherited money from ordinary household use, not out of distrust of their partner, but as an unconscious way of protecting the memory the money represents. Spending it on groceries or renovations can feel, irrationally but powerfully, like spending the deceased parent themselves. This isn't really a financial reaction, it's a grief reaction wearing financial clothing, and it can catch both partners off guard because neither one expects grief to show up in a conversation about a kitchen. Here's what Rachel eventually realized months later In a conversation with a therapist, she started seeing for the grief itself. She wasn't protecting the money from Dale, she was protecting her last connection to her parents from becoming ordinary. As long as the $280,000 sat untouched in its own account, it still meant something specific. The moment it became indistinguishable from their joint checking account, the money that started as her parents' life savings would become functionally identical to a paycheck, and some part of her couldn't let that happen yet. Around month 10, Dale finally asked directly what was going on, not accusingly, just honestly confused about why she'd gone quiet every time money came up. Rachel told him what she hadn't been able to articulate even to herself until that moment. It had never been about him. She trusted him completely. It was that she didn't know how to let the money become theirs without it feeling like her father's death stopped mattering as much as it should. Saying it out loud was the first time either of them understood what had actually been happening for 10 months. They didn't resolve it by splitting the inheritance in half or by Rachel simply getting over it, because grief doesn't respond predictably to either of those moves. What worked for them, with guidance from her therapist, was a small, deliberate ritual, one approach among many that can work differently for different people. A portion of the inheritance went into a fund explicitly named after her father, used only for things that honored him directly. A trip to the town where he grew up, a bench dedicated to him in their local park, a fund for her kids' education that she could think of as his legacy continuing forward. The rest, over the following year, slowly and intentionally, did become part of their shared financial life, not because Rachel was forced to let go, but because she'd given herself a way to keep a piece of it sacred first. That's what the separate account had actually been protecting, not the money from her husband, the grief, and what was left of her parents, from being absorbed into ordinary life before she was ready. Dale never saw it as betrayal once he understood it, because it wasn't about him at all. It was about Rachel needing to define, on her own terms and in her own time, what ours could mean without erasing what the money used to be. If you or your spouse is anticipating an inheritance, the actual challenge usually isn't deciding how to invest it or whether to pay off debt with it. It's having an honest conversation, early, about what that money represents to the person receiving it, and giving them room to define what ours means on their own timeline. This is for educational and entertainment purposes only, not personalized financial, legal, or mental health advice. Laws on inheritance and marital property vary by state, and grief is personal, so consult a qualified professional for your own situation. There's a video on this channel that breaks down exactly how to have that conversation before the money arrives, not after,